This is the last video for your review. It covers questions 26 through 31 and focuses on the skill of completing the square. This is the most recent skill we worked on. In order to complete the square, we need to get rid of the constant. So remember, constant is the number without x. And we do that by performing the opposite operation and move it to the other side. So to get rid of this plus 11, we're going to subtract 11. And I'm going to rewrite it, and I'm going to leave some blank space here because I'm going to end up adding in a number. And I'll also add that number on this side as well. Same number, because what we add to one side, we have to add to the other. In order to form what's called the perfect square trinomial, we take that middle term, so negative 12, and we divide it by 2. So this negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. That's the number that is going to form the perfect square, so x minus 6. However, in order to form this, we have to add a number, and that number is going to be that negative 6 squared, which is 36. So I'm going to have to add 36 to both sides. And now I'm going to combine this negative 11 plus 36. That will give me positive 24. The reason why this works is because when I factor this, it will factor into x minus 6 times x minus 6, so I'm able to write it with this square. Now it's in a form where I can easily solve it using the same methods I use by solving by evaluating square roots. Now this has this x squared term by itself, so I can take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with x minus 6 equals positive or negative 5. I split it into two separate equations. X minus 6 equals negative 5, and x minus 6 equals positive 5. We're going to add 6 to each side of each equation. And I get x equals 1 and x equals 11. So I'd write this x equals 1, comma 11. This one we see the constant is already on the right side, so we can skip that step. We are going to have x squared plus 20x. Leave that space. We're going to be adding in a number. Same for both sides. To figure out what that number is going to be, you take the middle term, 20. It's a positive 20. We're going to divide it by 2 is 10. That's what will end up in the x squared portion. And then to figure out what you're adding, you take that number and you find the square of it. So that's 100. So we're going to add 100 to each side. 60 plus 100 is 160. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides. Gives me x plus 10 equals, the square root of 160 is not a perfect square. 169 is a perfect square. So what we're going to do is we're going to just leave it in that square root form. We're going to subtract 10 from both sides. And we're going to write this x equals negative 10 plus the square root of 160, and x equals negative 10 minus the square root of 160. And that, though it looks kind of ugly and not really finished, it actually is done. Question number 28. We're going to get rid of the constant by subtracting it. We have x squared minus 8x. Leave that blank for the number we're going to be adding. To figure out what that number is, we are going to take the middle term, negative 8, divide by 2, negative 4. That ends up being the number with x. And then you have to square that number to figure out what you're adding. That's positive 16, so we're going to add 16 to both sides. Negative 4 plus 16 is 12. And we're going to take this square root. Again, 12 is not a perfect square, So we're just going to say that's plus or minus the square root of 12. And to get rid of minus 4, we have to add 4 to both sides. So I'm going to have x equals 4 plus square root of 12 and 4 minus the square root of 12. Those will be our solutions. All right, question 29. I started off by getting rid of that plus 23, bring it to the other side. X squared minus 12x, leave that blank space for what you're going to be adding, equals negative 23, leave that blank space. Figure out what that new number will be by dividing the middle term by 2. That's negative 6, that's what's going to be with x. And then you square that negative 6 to figure out what you're adding, which is 36. We're going to add 36 to both sides. 36 minus 23 is 13. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with x minus 6 equals positive or negative 13, square root of 13. Square root of 13 is not a perfect square, so we're just going to leave the square root of 13 in there. Add 6 to both sides, so we end up with x equals 6 minus square root of 13 and 6 plus square root of 13 are our solutions. Right, we have to get rid of this plus, or sorry, we have to get rid of this minus 13 by adding 13. Make sure to leave a space for the number we're going to be adding in. Figure out what that number is by dividing by 2. It's just 4. That's the number that ends up with x. And we square that number. 4 squared is 16. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. 13 plus 16 is 29. So we're going to take this square root of both sides. That's x plus 4 equals, square root of 29 is not a perfect square, so we're just going to leave it square root of 29. Subtract 4 from both sides. X equals negative 4 minus the square root of 29, comma, negative 4 plus the square root of 29. Our last example. The constant is already on the right side, so we can skip that step. Now we just want to figure out what we're adding to both sides. 6 divided by 2 is 3. That's the number that ends up with x. We square to figure out what we're adding. So we're going to be adding 9. 13 plus 9 is 22. Take the square root of both sides. Leaves me with x plus 3 equals the square root of 22. Subtract 3. X will equal negative 3 minus the square root of 22, or negative 3 plus the square root of 22. And that is completing the square.